names. I don't want to.
Mr. Jones.
My name's Dave Jones. I used to work here. I was an editor and a reporter at the Times for several years. I never actually worked in this building because I left before it was finished. But I have been asked to welcome you on behalf of the Times to the building, to the Times. We're happy to be your hosts here and hope you're enjoying your evening. Just a word on the building. I thought you might find it interesting. This building was finished in 2007, so it's only 10 years old. Host this evening. The largest accredited mass communications college in the United States, University of the United States. Marie came to Penn State in 2003, and she worked in a number of, as a faculty member, obviously teacher, and in a number of administrative jobs. She was named Associate Dean for Research in 2010, and she was selected by the Board of Trustees and the President of Penn State as the Dean in July of 2014. She, in addition to being an outstanding administrator, she has had a reputation of being an outstanding teacher. She won the Atherton Award in 2009, which is given by Penn State to outstanding teachers. And she has been teaching at the university level at 2 universities before she came here. Her research focus is diversity, ethics, and professionalism in sports journalism. She has a BA from Ambassador University, an MA from Georgia State, and a PhD from the University of Georgia. As an illustration of the regard that she's held in which she's held in the academic community, on May 2, just a couple weeks ago, she was chosen as Vice President for the Association of Education in Journalism and Mass Communications, and she will ascend to the presidency of that organization in the year 2018 and 2019. She's building on a great legacy from Doug Anderson, who was dean here for 15 years, who I believe brought her here, had the wisdom to bring her here, and she's enlarging that and going to take the Communications College into a new level. So it's a pleasure to introduce the new dean, Marie Hartman.
Thank you, Dave. And now it's my turn to talk a little bit about you. Now, you may know about Dave Jones' long and highly accomplished career in journalism, including at the Times and at the Wall Street Journal. But I want you to know that he's also an equally prominent Penn Stater. He's a 1954 graduate, and as a student was editor of the Daily Collegian. He is an emeritus member of Penn State's Board of Trustees after serving 3 consecutive terms. He is winner of the university's most prestigious alumni awards, and he and his wife have established scholarships for our students. So thank you, Dave, for your ongoing loyalty and support. Now, this is a milestone for the Bart Richards Award for Media Criticism. Now, the award has been around for 20 years, but this is the first time that we've conducted this ceremony in New York City. And how appropriate. We are in the nation's media capital, and we're able to recognize our winners here at the New York Times with its magnificent history and its unique role as a leader among legacy news organizations. And it certainly remains an agenda setter for great journalism. And we have so many great alumni in this city, leaders in the media, advertising, and entertainment industries. Thank you for being here. We also have college faculty and staff with us tonight, and I want to recognize Russ Eshelman, head of our journalism department. And we also have John Affleck, who after a 22-year career with the Associated Press is now our night chair in sports media and society. And one thing about John is he calls New York and State College both home.
Nice.
This is the college's final big event for the 2015-16 academic year, and we're always grateful to end on such a high note. Now, less than 2 weeks ago, more than 700 students in the college graduated, and that ceremony capped another great year of achievement. Just a few things I want to mention. Our second place overall finish in the Hearst Foundation's National Journalism Awards program. This continues our ongoing streak of top 10 finishes in that most prestigious of collegiate competitions. Russ Eshelman will be soon traveling to the Hearst program's individual championships with senior Aaron McCarthy, who will represent Penn State there. We also remain ranked among the top 10 universities in the U.S. for placements in the prestigious Dow Jones News Fund internship program. 2 of our students in that program this summer will be interning right here at the New York Times. And just last night, our 2-time-a-week newscast, Center County Reports, was named Best Newscast at the Collegiate Emmy Awards in Los Angeles. Of course, we continue to expand our opportunities for students. We had our new internship program get off to a great start in Los Angeles just this semester. All 5 majors in the college, for the first time, took classes on special travel abroad excursions over spring break. And thanks to generous donor support, we'll be sending students to cover both political conventions this summer and to cover the Paralympics in Rio this fall. And we continue to make plans for our new student-run video production agency and our digital analytics minor. Both of those will get off the ground later this year. But we're here at the Times tonight to recognize the kind of work to which our best students aspire. The Bart Richards Award for Media Criticism was made possible through the generosity of Penn State alumnus George Richards and his wife, Ann. In 1994, they endowed this award to honor George's father, Bart Richards, longtime editor of the Newcastle News in Pennsylvania. Bart Richards was, by all accounts, an extraordinary journalist and person. He was a highly Sunday Post. And tonight, we are pleased to present the Bart Richards Award for Media Criticism to Reliable Sources. I'm sure you've all heard of it, and I trust many of you make it must-see TV when it airs, or you subscribe to the newsletter, as I do. And what a critical need for the kind of stories that come from reliable sources, especially during election season where perhaps the media, as much as any candidate, has been a major factor in what we see unfolding across the country. Our judges considered 5 segments from that program during 2015. They started with the January segment that explored issues around identifying mass murderers and featured an interview with parents of shooting victims. Other segments explored such issues as the media's role in presidential campaigns and in the coverage of ISIS. Besides his work on camera, host Brian Stelter also wrote, get this, more than 500 stories, from original reporting to analysis, for the CNN Reliable Sources website last year. The judges also considered a sample of these stories. And obviously, they were impressed. The judges selected Reliable Sources and Brian Stelter because of his compelling analysis, his understanding of the role of social media in big stories, and his ability to offer cogent criticism on a variety of topics. Now, when I watched selected segments from 2015, I was struck by the breadth of Brian's work, interviewing top editors from major media organizations and interviewing politicians and media personalities about breaking stories and media trends, but also adding the fun human interest stories, such as the one he did with his childhood idol, R.L. Stine, author of the Goosebumps series. I should mention Brian's background before joining CNN. Indeed, this isn't the first time he's been in the Times building. He was media reporter for the Times from 2007, when he graduated from Towson University, to 2013. And he is someone to watch. Brian has been named to Forbes magazine's 30 Under 30 media list for the past 3 years. I am honored that Brian is here to receive this award. And before asking him to accept the award and make a few comments, though, I'd like to thank some members of his family for joining us. His wife, Jamie, and you have to hear the story about how they met on Twitter. His mother, Donna, and Jamie's parents, Helen and Neil Shupak. Welcome. On behalf of the College of Communications at Penn State, I am pleased and honored to present the Bart Richards Award for Media Criticism to Reliable Sources. Accepting is Brian Stelter. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. It is a thrill to be back in the New York Times building and to not be working here. I felt it change right when I walked in, which was very cool. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you so much for the honor. I want to start by thanking Bart Richards' family, as well as Penn State, the professors at Penn State, and the judges, of course, for this. I look at the list. I think some of you have the list here of past recipients in the past 20 years. And when I see this list, what I see is a list of truly the best media on media, you might call it that, that's produced in the United States. I look at On the Media from NPR, winning twice recently, the Columbia Journalism Review, the American Journalism Review, the first New York Times public editor, and you know, way back in the 90s, James Fallows, who's been a great guest with me on Reliable Sources, Alicia Shepard, and many others. To me, that list is the lineup of who you want covering media, and so it's such a thrill that Reliable Sources is on that list now for the first time. Because what we do on CNN, what we hope we do on CNN every week on TV and every day online is explore, you know, why we do what we do in the industry. Now, first and foremost, best thing for me about this award is that it's for the entire Reliable Sources team, the show team and the web team. And what I love about it is that it merges both of those. It's what we're trying to do every day at CNN. Try to merge the television side, the website, and bring them all into harmony. So on the TV side, on the TV team, Shanta and Lee and John and Jason and Molly and Dom, who produce the show every week, who come up with the great ideas, who find the guests, who persuade the guests. And then on our website, as we blur the two of them, Rich and Lex and Mark and our team of reporters, every day we're churning out stories, myself and others as well, and hopefully continuing to blur those lines between TV and web. You know, I look at this list and I think about all the people I just named, and I think sometimes it feels like there are lots of people covering the media, talking about what we do and how we do it. And in some ways that's true. If you think about it, there's more writing about media than ever before. There's so much media criticism right now. Everybody is a media critic. You look at my Facebook feed and you see that everybody is a media critic. And there's so much writing about media from unexpected places. There are more possible awardees than ever before. There's more being produced. But what I don't see nearly as much of is media reporting. And what I mean by that is explaining why we did what we did as opposed to complaining about it or commenting it. But actually looking at why and how and who decided and why they decided. Actually reporting, figuring it out. And I would add one tweak to that. Media reporting, but also media explaining. Trying to help people understand it. So to me, when I look at the landscape, I see less of that than ever, but more writing than ever. And what I'm hoping we continue to do at CNN is focus on the reporting side. And then be critical, but focus on the reporting side and explore why things are the way they are. My mentor for many years here at the New York Times, David Carr, I think did that perfectly until he passed away here last year. He would write columns with a point of view and tell you where he was coming from, but based on reporting, based on interviewing. And so I hope we continue to strive for that. So for me, it's been about 2.5 years at CNN since I left the New York Times. I was joining as the host of Reliable Sources in the end of 2013, and ever since I've been continuing to host the show and build up the web portion of the job. And when I started hosting the show on the first Sunday morning, I used the name of the show to explain the mission. And I wanted to share that with you because I think that hopefully can inform media reporting more broadly. You know, why are we doing this? Why are we covering ourselves? Why are we writing about the CNNs of the world, the New York Times of the world, and the BuzzFeeds of the world? What's the point? What I said on the show that morning was 10 simple words. I think they're 10 words. I said, nowadays, everybody's a source. Everything's a source. So what's reliable? Nowadays, everybody's a source, so what is reliable? And I don't know about you guys, but that's what I struggle with. And that's the daily struggle. As more and more content's being produced, as more and more corporations are producing their own stuff that looks like journalism, as more and more campaigns are producing their own stuff that looks like media and journalism, as everybody can write and can critique, and that's a wonderful thing about the internet. The question is what's reliable and who's reliable? And to me that's the driving question, the driving point behind most media reporting. You know, we wrestle with this question every day, and we need media reporting to help us answer who we can believe and what we can believe and why we can believe it. And I don't say who we can't believe, I'm trying to come from a positive place, but who can we believe and why? And I guess I look at the news business and I think the reason why we need this right now especially is in the news business it's the best of times, and it's also, my goodness, it's the wildest of times. I'm trying not to say the worst, but I don't want to say the worst, but this is this period of media, you think about it, it is so hairy, it is unpredictable, it is rife with uncertainty and tension and frankly some really terrible journalism and stuff that pretends to be journalism. I don't know about you, but I've been tricked by hoaxes on Facebook, you know, the sites that look like news and they're not. And that's not even counting the sloppy work that's produced by so-called journalists. The stories that are rife with errors, the stories that are so slanted that they might as well be opinion pieces. There's a lot to be critical of and there's a lot to be skeptical of right now. Probably more than ever because there's more content than ever. I think you think about where we've come in 20 years since the first time this award was presented, actually 22 years. The big difference, of course, the big change, is not just the internet, but the pervasiveness of the internet in our lives, and how all forms of media have been squished together into your phone. There's more information, more accessible to more people than ever before, and tomorrow that'll be even more true. And frankly, it's obviously the best thing that's happened in my lifetime, right? I'm only here today because of the internet, and because when I was in college, I was able to start a blog, and then I was able to get hired at the New York Times right out of college thanks to that blog. Best thing that ever happened to me. And yet, that abundance comes with so many downsides as well, which we're all aware of, and I think which we're seeing more and more of all the time. With that abundance, with that accessibility of so much information, so much clutter sometimes, the clear challenge is for all of us as journalists, the people that work in my shop and the people that work here at the Times and elsewhere, is to gain and regain the trust of a very skeptical audience every day. And again, that's why I think we need media reporting, especially now. The challenge is to, we know the audience is distrustful, we know there's skeptics out there and they should be skeptical, to try to win people and win people back. And obviously there's selfish reasons to do this, right? There's selfish reasons to do this. Improving trust means a potentially bigger audience, more people that might read your work and watch your programs and pay attention to you. But there's also very unselfish reasons, and we see that this year with the election cycle, with regards to accurate information in the campaigns versus inaccurate information in the campaigns. We have one candidate in particular who is seeking to demonize the press in ways we haven't seen before. And to be able to say that clearly and definitively is important. I think we gain and we regain trust. We try to be reliable sources, but that's not enough. We can't just try to gain people's trust. We also have to persuade them about why it's worth doing what we do. We have to explain why we do what we do, and you can call that transparency, you can call it a variety of things, but it all comes back to that same main point, right? Which is that if we can one by one start to gain people and regain their trust, then we're going to start to heal some of the wounds that we see, both with media as an institution and with other institutions. So that's my optimistic take, and I do try to be optimistic. You know, we say media criticism, even the root word criticism is inherently negative in some ways. But I think it's important to also praise the best of journalism and not, especially in this moment where there's so much defense that's being played, to point out the positive as well as the negative. And one of the submissions for this award in particular was one that tried to highlight the best of journalism. We talked with a CNN correspondent who was the Paul Revere of Hurricane Katrina 10 years ago. Gene Meserve called in to CNN the night of the breaking of the levees, repeatedly called in trying to get attention, and finally on the air explained that actually the worst wasn't over, and New Orleans hadn't been spared the way we thought. Remember that day we only saw pictures from the French Quarter, and it looked like there wasn't much flooding at all, and in fact we know what happened in other wards. And so she was there, she was on the phone, and she was able to tell people what was happening. She broke down in tears when she was on the phone that night. And I always remembered it. I'll never forget that scene, and yet I kind of felt like we were starting to lose it to history. So to bring her back, have her talk about that experience, to me it was a great chance to highlight the best of journalism. Now, at the same time, one of the other submissions we presented for this award talked about coverage of ISIS and whether television in particular overstates and exaggerates the threat, not just from ISIS, but also from terrorism writ large, what the repetition of images and words does to viewers. So there's this great spectrum, right? And we can put a lot of stories on the spectrum of positive, negative, and in between. And I focus on the negative perhaps sometimes because by covering shortcomings, by covering the flaws and the weaknesses and the just straight out BS that passes for media and journalism sometimes, we're able to educate people about why it happens and hopefully create a reason for less of it, right? It's almost an incentive system, and I do think about media reporting this way. There is, to some degree, an incentive system when you are. I'm trying to think of a good example from the show recently that we didn't submit from last year, but when you spend time talking about the failings, and other journalists notice it, there is a cleansing part to that, and I think in some ways that's why media criticism has a lot in common with journalism programs, actually. So I would close kind of thinking about the connection between the two. Some of our best guests, for example, are professors, are from the academic fields. And that's because they're able to bring a real sense of nuance and insight and depth that you don't always get when you're busy in a newsroom every day. You think about the similarity between a program like Reliable Sources or a publication like Columbia Journalism Review or a show like On the Media. And what you're doing at its best, what you're doing at your best is educating people about the media's ups and downs, upholding the values of journalism, hopefully, and maybe most importantly, figuring out how it's going to change in the digital age. And if we can help with some of that understanding, some of that, you think about the anxiety right now, both among news consumers and news professionals. We can help unpack some of that. That's what journalism programs are doing, helping students, and that's what programs like Reliable Sources are doing, helping consumers of news. If you asked me, and I'm going to open it up at this point to questions, and we can talk about the work of the program last year and the web work, but if you were to ask me, what's the future of media? It's a much parsed, much talked about, much debated question. You can find 1,000 essays about it. Many of them very pessimistic about the future of the news business. Some somewhat more optimistic. I would say that the future of the media, and hopefully as a result, the future of media reporting, is more in all its forms. The future of the media is more. There's going to be more of everything. We're in this age of abundance, cultivated by the web. As a result, we're going to continue to have even more great work, impressive award-winning work. We're also going to have more of that other stuff that we've got to scrutinize and criticize. The future of the media is all of the above, all answers to those questions. And that can be, as I said, the very troubling and anxiety-producing situation, but it can also be the best of times as a result. So I'll pause there and open it up for your questions about our work this year or anything else. Who would like to go first? Yes?
Hi there, my name is Brianne. I did policy communications for a while, so
Awesome.
Not trying to be aggressive. So I have a question for you based off, with your role of blurring the web and TV, that's very interesting to me. How do you find that evolving? And, because we get into a lot of places where I started in 2010, and there were silos. And there's very effective places, I used to work at Brookings, that had these silos.
Yeah.
People are great at social media. They are great at video. But I found that, and we had found that at different places I've worked.
Yeah.
They need to blur, but we create these kind of separate channels. And how do you do that in Reliable Sources? How do you translate and blur between those to kind of come up with the recipe that you have?
Right. I think it may begin with recognizing that there are different skill sets and different things that come to the table, and that's especially valuable for journalism programs to keep in mind and to recognize. There were many surprises for me going from a print-based news organization at the New York Times to a TV-based one at CNN. And I probably didn't know what I didn't know, right? What's that Rumsfeldian line? You don't know what you don't know. I didn't know how much I didn't know about television, and was very lucky to be able to learn on the job in some ways like grad school. But that said, even though there are different skill sets, I think some of them are learnable. And more to your deeper point, I think what we as a group have come to recognize more and more, maybe over the past year or so, is what story is best told on television, what story is best told on the web, and which stories can we cross along with both. What I love about this current model, this current structure we have, where we have a team of reporters writing stories all week, is that when the show is focused on politics, which is the story of our year and maybe the decade, we'll see what happens, we can cover the rest of the media world online. And I don't think that's a lesser, here's the problem, I think. Years ago, we used to talk about that as being, we're just going to put it online. We used to say that downstairs on the third floor of this newsroom. We'll just put it online. We're not going to put it in the paper. And I think that mindset is not entirely evaporated, but it's quickly evaporating. It does in this building, and it has to at CNN, and it has to at other outlets as well. It's not just online anymore. Online is the thing. Everything else is an extension. I don't know if my bosses would agree with me, but I think in a not too distant future, CNN will not be a television network. It'll be a news operation, It'll be a website that happens to have a television network. That's a significant shift in mindset. Even though the television network would tend to make the bulk of the money, the website is the core, and the television network is a piece. And I think to have that mindset helps us to then blur the lines between them. Yeah.
Brian, with the emerging dominance of the internet in reporting, are you concerned that the value of the old school type of reporting, as advocated by previous Bart Richards winners, Bill Kovach and Tom Rosenstiel, is the value of that being lost among the rising core of young reporters?
I try to be optimistic, and I try to say no. I try to say that young people entering the profession are clear-eyed about what's changed, and can be part of the solution to some of the ailing problems, as Margaret Sullivan wrote this week in her first Washington Post media column. But I also see lots of reasons to be bearish as well as bullish. Where are you, more bullish or bearish?
I'm concerned. I'm an old school reporter, and I see so much attitude and so much poor reporting. You were talking about the quality of reporting. I think it's declining, and I hope I'm wrong.
Do you see how I try to turn on you and answer your question? It makes me more comfortable. But I'm with you, and frankly, there are a couple of things I think that would help, at least to some degree. One would be to have all those young reporters have the experience of being written about. You know, this is an old saw. It's nothing original that I'm saying, but I do think it helps immeasurably to be on the other side and to be the one asked the questions, as opposed to answering the questions. To be misquoted. I think about the impact of being misquoted. You know, if you're quoted correctly in an article, you might tell your family. If you're misquoted, you're going to tell everybody you know. And as a result, the error is going to spread much more widely than the version of being accurate. So I think having the tables turned is a valuable experience. I think the other partial solution to what I agree is a significant problem is to continue to elevate the high quality journalism that's being produced. And partly that's through awards, partly that's through social media, actually, through celebrating the strong work. Partly it is through journalism and academic programs that try to point out strong work. You know, I think to the degree that there are still incentive structures for quality, and we can keep those in place, it's a partial solution, but I know it's not a full solution. But because especially when we're driven by, and we are driven by traffic, all of us in one way or another wants to be read by as many people as we can, and some of that leads to clickbaity behavior. That is what's driving these newsrooms, many of these newsrooms all the time, and there's not a full solution to that problem.
Can I have a follow-up?
Yeah, of course.
How much of that is on the news media to let their young reporters have the time that it takes to turn out a good story?
I think it's partly time, but I think it's also even more editors making sure we maintain the editor level and editor standards. Because from my experience with young journalists who do either struggle or kind of recognize that they're not performing the way they should be, it's usually because of that lack of that editor level, right? Or a television network, that producer level, where there's support from more experienced colleagues. I've encouraged young reporters at digital startups where they don't have any editors to seek out mentors elsewhere, to seek out colleagues at least who can peer edit, but that's not a full answer to the issue. And I would like to think, trying to be optimistic here as I think about your question, if a big part of the answer does entail subscription models for news. When a lot of the behavior we see online that we roll our eyes at, stories that are out of context, stories that are just sloppy, stories that feel like they were written in only 5 minutes. Most of that is an ad-driven model. Most of that is a page-driven model. The New York Times, the CNNs of the world that are subscription-driven in their various ways, I think we can make a strong argument that's where the higher quality work is. And to the extent that the audience supports subscription models more, I think we're going to be better off across the country. I'm heartened by the New York Times success, not so much, of course, by regional papers and elsewhere. I'd like to think that the cable bundle actually is a model for news. I don't know if it could be, but you all pay for CNN without realizing it, right? You all pay for Fox without realizing it. Also NBC News and ABC News and CBS News. And there's no equivalent for that online, and there probably won't ever be, but could there be bundles of news like that? Could you, through your AT&T or Verizon bill, pay $5 a month for all you can eat of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the FT and all the locals that you want to say? And I don't know, but could there be? I'd like to think that we can continue to innovate as an industry on subscription models. Because the other reason why subscription models are inherently superior is that there's more of a connection to the reader. If I'm paying for you, I expect more out of you, and vice versa. And so I would like to think that can, to the extent that that can continue to grow at the New York Times and elsewhere, that might be part of the answer. Let's go to switch sides here.
Jay Rosen and others have talked about the challenge of false equivalence. And as we enter into this election season, does the age of Trump make that a more present challenge? Or how do you balance the challenge of false equivalence, especially in a contested election year?
I do, and I think that, frankly, the subtext of every hour of cable news is false equivalence. Every time you hear the election is nasty, Clinton's not being nasty. I think we can all agree that she's not nasty in the way that Donald Trump is. She might have some nasty tactics, and God knows some of her allies and surrogates are going to get down to dirt. But there is a false equivalency between these campaigns, and I think it's going to be incumbent on the talking heads on TV to say so very clearly when, see, think about it. It's so easy and natural to want to fall into these, you call them traps, of false equivalency. It's very easy to want to say to the camera or want to write in the lead of your story that the election's gotten down and dirty. It's easy to want to blame both sides. It's comfortable. It also avoids hate from readers and viewers. Avoids reader hate mail. But frankly, I think that's my job the next 5.5 months, right? And for all of us who cover media, to be on the alert against that. Because I can see it happening already all the time. I'm sure some of you all can as well. That we're lumping, and we can include Sanders in this as well, we're lumping everybody in together when we're actually seeing two very different kinds of campaigns. I find a lot to admire in the Trump campaign, but I don't admire some of the tactics that make it feel very personal. I don't admire the conspiracy theories that we're hearing time and time again. And to the degree that we can be very clear in CNN language straight into the camera, and in New York Times language, very clearly in the lead of the story, pushing back, I think I actually have I'm pretty optimistic. I think this is going to be a very strong period for journalism covering the campaign because the differences are so clear, and because many journalists feel that this is not a normal election. So we'll see. We'll see what the language is, right? But it's going to be incumbent on media reporters, I think, for the next 5.5 months to watch out for that. God, is it really 5.5 months? It really is, isn't it? Woo! 5.5 months. Yeah.
I ask you this as both a media critic and as a former New York Times man. I think all of us who read the New York Times read it as probably the most authoritative source of news in the United States. Those of us who do not anymore have direct access to the AP wire. It is it. And yet, there has been a steady drumbeat of criticism that the Times is biased in favor of Hillary Clinton against Bernie Sanders. We know that the Times editorial page does not like Donald Trump. How do you see the editorial page bleeding onto the front page?
I don't see the editorial page bleeding onto the front page, but I see other similar pressures, meaning pressure to stand out, pressure to say something new when there's an abundance of content. It's very hard to break through. I think those kind of pressures sometimes might lead to a Times story 2 weeks ago about Trump's behavior with women, which even the reporters here would privately acknowledge was off the mark. I don't know if it's so much opinion pressure, but there are certainly editorial pressures that I think are resulting in that. And I agree with you that it's still the most, it's still the maybe most reliable source in terms of daily, daily newspapering or that kind of website. But the fact that it has more competition than ever and from more directions, hopefully, is a good thing for the paper. Yeah.
To take you a little bit back to your coverage of the morning news shows and the book you wrote, it's amazing, and being in the media, I'm not sure if it's as of much interest to the people that are not, but it seems a fascination, not just with how the shows are doing, but the personnel changes.
Right.
And sort of the personalities. It's almost like covering a soap opera of sorts.
Or an election.
You're right. And right, so I'm just, when you're discussing what you're going to do on the website or on the show, how much thought are you putting into, are people not just interested in what the reporting is, but sort of personality-based, who's doing the reporting?
For sure, the audience absolutely is. The audience cares about, I think for media reporting, the audience cares about personality and they care about controversy. And those are two sweet spots that I found for the Reliable Sources team. When we talk about the morning shows, it's a very simple truth. People watch people. They're not watching the Today Show, they're watching Matt Lauer. And to some extent that's also true in cable news. I think it's especially true in network news. And I think that's why the morning show wars resonate so much, because it is an interpersonal conflict and it's about the figures that you see on the box. I think that'll always be true even as we shift into this much more digital age. People are still going to watch people, even if it's still on a much smaller screen or on a VR headset. People still watch people. And as a result, there will always be interest in the personalities. I would like to think that we can cover journalists as individuals and be fair about it, not treat it like entertainment. But it is important to I think to be knowing who's producing the news, to cover the New York Times, for example, as Dean McKay's newsroom. So I think that there's value to that, and certainly I found when I look at the traffic for stories and I look at what media stories really resonate, it is stories about the leaders of these places, the talking heads on TV, the personalities who deliver you the news, for sure. Yeah.
I just have a follow-up question to that. So if people watch people, do people read people?
I mean, you know better than I do. I don't think to the same degree. No, I don't think to the same degree. I get depressed by the lack of recognition of the byline sometimes. But yes, I think there is a big difference. I actually think news outlets can help change that. I mean, whether it's Facebook Live commentaries with newspaper reporters, or whether it's more prominent display of bylines, I don't just say that for myself, but more broadly, I would like to think that we're going to continue to see a move away from people trusting institutions and more toward people trusting individual writers and reporters and editors. And but I think right now it's much more true in TV than on the web. Yeah.
To your point earlier about subscription models, but also to your point about clickbait, my perspective is, very sincere to say, is that we've sort of evolved into a society where good enough is what matters. So journalistic standards may or may not have eroded, right? It's up for debate to some degree or another. But the consumption of the information, I think, is the way in which we discern what's true and what's not is eroded as well. Is that a fair assessment?
I think at many places, yes, there are some standards that have eroded. If you think about, in a very sort of mundane example, is a news outlet more likely now than it was 10 years ago to publish a story before one party responds for a requested comment? Definitely. I would argue that's okay, but it's definitely a change, and you might argue it's an erosion of standards. Sorry, go ahead.
But it is a societal change is what I'm asking.
Well, so on the societal change, that's where I would differ with you. I think for many people, good enough has always been good enough. And then for a smaller subset of people who are willing to pay for, whether it's Newsweek or Time or the New York Times or the Financial Times, willing to pay for news, they've always placed a premium on a higher quality. It's probably much more visible to us now, though, because people are having to make more conscious choices about what they consume. You think about Facebook on the news feed, it's hard to know what news outlets those stories are coming from. You're clicking through, you're reading the story, you may never recognize what brand it's coming from. It puts much more onus on the audience, on the individual reader or viewer, to pay attention to what they're consuming. As opposed to, we'll just take 20 years ago as an example, and when you're reading the magazine, you have to look at the cover first. So I think there are structural changes that have resulted in that. But I do think for the most part, there's always, and I think this is true in the future as well, some folks are always going to settle for good enough. And to the extent that on a one-by-one, everyday sort of way, we can persuade more people to try to get the better stuff. That's our game, that's our job, that's our challenge. I used to say when I was here at the Times that every day I would try to reply to every person that tweeted at me and every person that sent me a reader email. And I'm really bad at replying, so I'd always fail, and I still am getting worse. But I used to think to myself that if I replied to the individual readers, maybe I could convert one of them to subscribe that day. And maybe tomorrow I can convert one more person. And kind of one by one, maybe win more people over. I'm not going to make much of a dent in the American population, but if you extrapolate that, I think it's sort of old-fashioned marketing, right? Journalists have resisted, historically, if you read the literature, they've resisted wanting to be marketers, they've hated that M word. But I think we've had an awakening, maybe in the last 10 years, maybe for desperate reasons, to the value of marketing, to the importance of marketing, the importance of saying, no, this is the highest quality story, this is the best version, and it's worth seeking it out. Of course, Google and Facebook can help us with this now too. And I put a lot of this on the algorithms to try to point out what's not just good enough, but great. And then I put some of it on me and people like me as well. I'm always trying to remind myself not to waste time writing the 10th version of the story that's only going to be 1% better. Because the other stories actually in that case are good enough. If I don't have anything to add or any value to add, I shouldn't waste my time regurgitating and aggregating what's already been done. There's obviously a lot of pressures that, competitive pressures and financial pressures, others that encourage the rewriting of the story. But for journalism students and recent alums here, you're obviously never going to stand out when there's 50 people in a scrum of cameras and microphones. You're physically, unless you're 7 foot tall, never going to stand out in that scrum. You're never going to get noticed for what you did in that press conference, but you have a better shot of being noticed at least if you're writing something original. And I think that's, to me, when I think about good enough versus great, that's what I think about. I'm never going to remember the stories that I wrote that were good enough, but I'm going to remember the stories that were great. And hopefully the audience will too. I believe the audience will too. When I look at traffic metrics, I see the audience actually appreciating the great, most of the time.
You said that the Times story of Trump and women was off the mark. I'm sure you explored this in your reliable sources program, but I'm not familiar with what you said, so I'm just curious in what way it was.
I would suggest that 4,500 words on the Sunday front page was probably too many words for the topic, and I would suggest that the Times' failure to defend itself under massive artillery fire from Donald Trump was a failure to market and stand up for itself. That's a separate strategic conversation, but I know that the reporters who were involved, they could do it differently, they'd probably write a different lead, and maybe strategize differently about it. Yes, that was my impression. Is there a hand over here? Yeah.
So, in your work and in your studies of the reaction to the idea of issues like the mass murder identification and handling ISIS and that sort of thing, are there, beyond the subscription model, are there commonalities that you see in news organizations that are consistently thoughtful and consistently do provocative work?
That's a good question. I want to think on that. The first word that comes to mind to me, and it's an obvious one, is diversity. But it's not always. Diversity isn't always obvious. Meaning, there's a lot of different kinds of diversity, and let's take the case of the story about mass shooters. We did a segment and a couple of articles on the web about whether news outlets should name and show the faces of gunmen that commit mass killings. There are some family members from Aurora, from the movie theater shooting, who were calling something called no notoriety, meaning do not name them, do not show them. And I think for myself, who doesn't have kids, it doesn't resonate as much as for a parent who does have kids. And so when we were booking these guests, when we were bringing these parents in, when we were producing the segment, even that kind of diversity matters. Clearly ideological diversity matters, and race and ethnicity, but also I'm passionate about class bias in media, how this city and newsrooms in this city in particular are kind of Northeast elite driven. Maybe it's because David Carr came from a state school, and my editor came from a state school, and I came from a state school, and not from from Maryland, but not from New York. I value that, and I think maybe because all of our bosses were Harvard guys, and the New York Times, that we valued that kind of diversity as well. I think that's only a partial answer. I want to think more on other answers.
I
But
always thought I was a diversity hire.
well, how so?
At the Times. When I went to Penn State.
Penn State, there you go. There you go. That's right. That's right. I think we have time for one more
One
question.
more question.
Cool. Who wants to, no pressure.
So I work with a lot of clients that I think are hesitant to insert themselves into stories. They think that the protesters, the activists, or the critics against them are going to get 90% of the column. It's a little bit more interesting than maybe the corporate POV. So what type of access should they be bringing to the journalists, whether it be the type of statement, C-suite level, that would maybe balance that story a little bit more against what most people I think would find a little bit more interesting than the company's response?
Right. I mean, there's nothing worse than a corporate statement that feels like 20 people edited it and worked on it and reads like it's a mission statement for the company, right? And we see it all the time, and we see it on campaigns as well. To me, there are so many reasons why I don't want to use the word authentic, but a more genuine, more individual, a more raw or rough around the edges sort of response is more effective. And it's not just because we're all walking around Snapchatting ourselves, taking pictures of ourselves all day, although that's a factor, right? We're getting more used to the rawness of media, and that's why I appreciated the fact I've been covering the Gawker Hulk Hogan stuff this week. The Gawker put out like 3 statements, various statements, and they were snarky, and they were quotable, and they were a little sarcastic, and that certainly, I think dominated some of the coverage of the story. What I find more than anything else is journalists, want to need access, and more companies are trying to restrict access and tell their own story on their own Facebook page or something. To the extent that all people and all companies are now media companies, and we're all making our own media, it's going to be more and more incumbent on us as journalists to be fact-checking, to be corroborating, to be challenging. It's actually a better position for us, because I think rewriting a press release is a pretty low-level journalistic act that I've done 1,000 times, and I'll do it 1,000 times more. But the higher-level act, obviously, is probing, challenging a company's position, fact-checking a candidate's statements. And to the extent that companies are going to keep writing their own press releases, we can skip that part and go up to the higher-level part, which is maybe a version going from good enough to great. So I will wrap up there. Thank you all for listening. I'm happy to talk for a while.
Brian, your energy, your optimism, and your thoughtful approach are just so impressive. So congratulations again on being our Bart Richards Award winner this year. And thank you all for coming. I hope that you made some connections and enjoyed the program as much as I